What's going on, y'all? KMBest here. Marvel Snap's metagame is pretty open right now, so here's 6 or 7 decks that prove that Marvel Snap is well beyond the big three. First up is this move list from Iris, who was chased out of Marvel Snap by the existence of Gambit, Horseman of Death. But now that Gambit is at least a little bit more counterable, now that we figured out how to deal with him, there are a couple of changes to this list that are worth talking about. The first one is, of course, Mobius, and Mobius is the best tech card against Gambit, Horseman of Death decks in the entire game. Your job is not to actually prevent them from playing Gambit, Horseman of Death, or blow up Gambit, Horseman of Death with Lady Deathstrike or anything like that. Your job is to make sure they're not doing it for free. A lot of the ways that people are going to try to trigger Gambit Horseman of Death are with discounted created cards, whether that be from Quinjet and Moon Girl, or from Mother Ascani, or from Valentina, or from Iron Patriot. This is the card that prevents that from happening. If you don't stop their velocity, you're going to lose to a bunch of Gambits. You need to stop them from being able to even turn on one. The other thing that this deck is doing is playing Lin Lee as 2 bodies that both cost 2, because a lot of the time you're going to be able to be faced with maybe 1 Gambit, but you will be able to try to beat just 1 Gambit. Now, this list is also generally able to do things with Thing First Steps that can take a Gambit off the board some of the time and redistribute its power in ways that commit to 2 lanes very heavily, allowing it to be a powerful deck that has a lot of ability to lie about where its power actually is. The other card this deck gets to leverage that's particularly potent in this metagame is Juggernaut. There is a lot to be said for juggering some people's nuts in this situation. It's a very strong card that can very much mean that you instantly win a lane as long as you have priority. This is a deck that is able to manipulate priority with very high levels of proficiency, thanks to cards like Madam Web and Batroc moving around the board, stacking up points, and of course Hydra Stomper and Craven and Sam Wilson benefiting from all of that. You have a ton of ability to choose whose cards are going to reveal first at any given time, and whether or not you want them to be yours or theirs. A lot of the time, you do want them to be yours, because you can use things like Cosmo to protect from Shadow King, you can move your cards around and prevent your opponents from being able to actually hit the cards they want to hit with the stuff they want to hit them with. The cards you have to look out for are Gambit, Horseman of Death, and Shadow King a lot of the time, and of course, anything that's able to go over the top of you through your Cosmo, through your Mobius, is going to be a little bit scary. Cosmo is a particularly relevant card against some techno-organic virus decks as well, and you can scale very well in those matchups, even though you're devoting a little bit of effort to playing a 3-3 in terms of what Cosmo actually is. This is a list that has a lot of ability to scale upwards, a lot of powerful cards in it, and a couple of meaningfully bad matchups that you are going to have to look out for that we are running specific tech for. Basically, we want to set up as many roadblocks as possible, and then run the incredibly efficient points package that Batroc is in order to win games. This next list is doing a very similar thing, even though it might not look all that similar on first glance. It's being played by Kun, but I believe I got the list from KMBest a month or so ago, and it looks pretty much the same. What this list is doing is able to really emphasize the ability to have singular cards that can win lanes and shift those cards around. A movable Iska is a super terrifying thing to see on your opponent's side of the board. A movable Human Torch is a super terrifying thing to see on your opponent's side of the board. A Juggernaut coming down in concert with either one of those things is a really dangerous thing to see on your opponent's side of the board. You kind of get where I'm going with this. The other thing that's really nice about this deck, though, is the rest of the move package is, pretty good. You shouldn't be upset at getting some 6 to 9 power versions of multiple man moving around. In fact, that's one of your better draws. You could just do stuff like that in a small ball kind of way, start moving around like an agonied multiple man, and it's that's actually not that much worse than what techno-organic virus decks are doing, and I also have Iska and Juggernaut to make sure that I'm going to be better than what techno-organic virus decks are doing. Really, this is just setting up a couple of cards that can really win the hell out of a lane. Giant Human Torches, giant Iskas, that's a thing we're trying to do here, and then a Juggernaut. But the rest of what sets that up is the points package in itself. The multiple man stuff used to be pretty far below the level of the power of something like Star-Lord Fin Fang Foom, and it very much is not anymore. We are in a metagame that is a lot smaller. There's a lot less in terms of massive point output. Sholau is gone. The decks that are doing massive point output are Surfer things that are very telegraphed with their massive point output, and things that you can disrupt with cards like Juggernaut, and things that you can maybe beat with cards like Iska and Human Torch. it's just not the same as what we used to have to deal with. And this lower point output is a lot of why this metagame is able to feel as good as it is. This is a functionally solid metagame that is able to do reasonable, you're able to play reasonable decks again. And that is a big upgrade. Perhaps the deck that is the one that I feel like definitely watched yesterday's video the most is this one from KMBest, which is simply asking, what is the best possible deck that I can play Killmonger and Mobius and Shadow King in and still have a reasonable point package? This is a very straightforward attempt at just doing as many points as possible in the context of a deck that is playing those 3 tech cards, and it does that pretty well. This is a deck that's definitely looking to restrict your opponent's output, and it's not just like, oh, I've got Killmonger, oh, I've got Shadow King, oh, I've got Mobius. I'm also gambiting something, like final turn is Killmonger Gambit, activate my Phantom X. There's like a lot of games where you just like don't have cards on the board, and your opponents just aren't actually doing anything. And Phantom X specifically is pretty compelling in a world where people are playing a lot of Captain Carter, and instead of them being able to like duplicate stuff on your head with their Mother Ascanis, you're making it so it's much harder for them to actually achieve that output thanks to the card, the powerhouse that is Mobius and Mobius right now. And if they're playing Techno-Organic Virus to go over you, you have the Killmonger to blow up their entire board, basically. There's just a lot of good tech usage here, and really that's what this deck is about. I know it is a Phantom X deck, but like realistically, the thing that it's actually doing is those 3 tech cards. I also want to shout out 2 buffs that I said were totally meaningless. Bucky Barnes getting that extra point of power, and Zombie Captain Marvel getting that extra point of power. You can clearly see here that they're totally meaningless and we'd be playing those cards anyway, but like whatever, okay? Just give it to them. Another interesting direction from a high elo player is this list from Jimmy Dickens. And the real thing that I want to highlight here is we have gone from a metagame where Clog was deeply unfavored due to a preponderance of decks that were very able to fill lanes on command without actually filling them. A lot of decks that were doing things in the Sholau space were particularly able to do that. A lot of those decks were also playing Merlin, which is particularly unpleasant for Clog decks, to a bunch of decks that are actually very sensitive to board space. Like a Techno-Organic Virus deck is extremely sensitive to board space a lot of the time. They can do like 3 in a virus to fill it up, but they're definitely going to have priority, so they're not actually going to be able to stop you, right? And that kind of thing, they're very sensitive to board space. The Silver Surfer decks are very sensitive to board space. It's an interesting thing to notice here, right? Like the Silver Surfer decks especially, they're not just sensitive to board space, they're sensitive to things that reduce the power of their cards and on the board. Like if you really want to shut down a Captain Carter lane, doing something like Diamondback Man-Thing will do that. You will get them, right? Like you get to get that stuff for free. And this is a really interesting thing in the sense that it's taking a couple of different lines of like, okay, there's a lot of people playing small stuff, Diamondback Man-Thing. There's a lot of people playing Surfer stuff, Diamondback Man-Thing. Both of those decks are pretty susceptible to being goblined on right now. They're not really able to stop you from doing that. That can just do things, and it'll actually kind of work a lot better than it used to. And I don't know if those realizations necessarily should lend themselves to being the same deck, right? Like, I can't tell you for sure that this is exactly the direction to go to deal with or to recognize the 2 things in this metagame that are actually pointing you that direction. You might not want to be playing both of them at the same time. But independently, recognizing that like Man-Thing Diamondback stuff is pretty good against a lot of this, and recognizing that Goblins are actually a much more playable card than they were when everyone was playing Kitty Pryde and Merlin, that is a very real realization. And I hope it gets a little bit of juices flowing in your brain, because that's how brains work, right? There's like juices in there, and like the more you think, the more they flow, and that's what a fever is when your juices are like they're running too much. And I don't really know where I'm going with this. From But, a bit of a fusion of Techno-Organic Virus and Ramp. One of the important realizations of Punisher War Machine is that it probably is an upgrade in Nightmare decks. This was pointed out to me by Smiz, and I think it's probably true. In as much as you want to ever be playing a Nightmare deck, Punisher War Machine is a pretty good card in it, and, you know, maybe Akari is as well. Because we have both Punisher War Machine and regular War Machine, which makes Akari playable, and it makes our Infinite playable. So between War Machine and Nightmare, we have a lot of ways of playing big guys with big bodies, and I think this is sort of one of those things where you really start to think about what the shape of the metagame actually is, right? Because I just talked about that KM worst deck. I've talked about Gambit a lot. I've talked about Killmonger a lot. These are things that are policing the metagame and keeping point totals low. And when you keep point totals low, a lot more, I'll just say this without reservation, when you keep point totals low, a lot more bad stuff is viable. When a bunch of stuff is being Shadow Kinged and Mobius and Killmonger, you can play just here's some big guys. Because everyone else is getting Shadow Kinged and Mobius and Killmonger, and you play against one of those decks and you're like, nice Shadow King, idiot, here's the Infinite, right? This is the thing that makes this metagame conducive to being able to play decks like this, just doing things like this, is that a lot of the ways in which you interact with your opponent are to take away the power that they've invested their board into having, right? And this is a deck that is not particularly vulnerable to any of those things. What is your Gambit going to do against my Red Skull Infinite game plan? Nothing. It's not going to do anything. And, maybe you'll still be able to outpower it, but you're going to have to actually do that on your own merits, right? That is the kind of thing that this deck is actually aiming at. And I think that that is a real vote in favor of this metagame actually feeling pretty good. Like, a lot of why this is, I find it difficult to disentangle the negative feelings people have about Gambit with also how many things it's just sort of letting exist, because if Gambit wasn't around, none of these decks would really be playable because we'd just be backtracking them, right? Like, there just wouldn't be a reason to do any of this, like, straightforward play a big guy stuff, because we'd just be outscaling them with small cards that combine well with each other, right? That's how it always has worked. But because Gambit is putting this downward pressure on that stuff, because Killmonger is putting this downward pressure on that stuff, there's just a lot less of it, and now you can play against the decks that are doing that stuff with stuff that those cards don't hit, and it doesn't have to be like the best thing in the world, it's just got to be big enough. And this is a deck that is full of a lot of cards that I would describe reasonably as big enough. From Gamer, I know he's going to get mad at me for this, but he sent me this with the message that he had a Scarlet Witch in there instead of the Scorpion, and a normal person would cut the Scarlet Witch for Scorpion, but he's him. So I cut the Scarlet Witch for Scorpion because I am not him, and I am a normal person. No, I really do think that Akari is a card that I'm a little more interested in than I thought I would be. When he came out, I was just like, I don't really care about this, but what I talked about in the previous segment, the structure of the metagame right now, makes me just fairly compelled by playing a large guy. Like, there's a world in which I'm like, I wonder if I can play this in a Techno-Organic Virus Mother Ascani deck, and I'm playing Scorpion and, like, Cassandra Nova, and then what I'm trying to do is Mother Ascani my Akari, and my final turn is just 28 power of Akaris, and that actually doesn't sound bad. Like, I'm just sort of like, it doesn't sound all that bad. Like, maybe I'm actually just kind of supposed to do that. And again, it's sort of down to what this metagame actually looks like, right? Like, the point totals in this metagame are so much lower than they were in Sholau Star-Lord land. We're just not in that world anymore. And a lot of it is because these tech cards are policing the metagame in a way that I think is largely conducive to metagame diversity. This is a thing that as long as you play by the rules that those tech cards set, you can kind of play a lot of bad stuff, because if you're not getting hit by those tech cards, you're kind of just in a pretty good spot. And so you have cards like this, you have decks like this that are just like, here's a bunch of stuff. I'm doing some stuff. Oh, you played a Gambit out, you're going to frigate? No, I got Red Guardian. Oh, by the way, that Red Guardian, I'm also going to be able to play an Akari there now. Like, there's just a bunch of good things happening here that are pretty compelling. Another thing that Gambit and Killmonger do is put pressure on you to make your opponent's boards weaker, and I think that's the other thing that I'm kind of enjoying about Afflict right now, is like, okay, yeah, I played a Scorpion, I played maybe there's a Cassandra Nova in here in the future. Again, this deck isn't set in stone. I've really kind of been messing around in weird spaces with this card, and Gamer is a successful mid-range player, and I trust him on this, but I do think there's maybe more room to be messing around here too. Like, okay, I have Scorpion you, I've taken power off of the things you play, I've taken power off of the things you play with Rocket and Groot. Even if those get removed later, I've still prevented your output from being as high as it could be. And I think that's another thing that's like pretty interesting in the way this deck actually plays out. Another card worth highlighting here is Electra, who's just great. There's a lot of one power cards that are just like really big. Like blow up a Martyr, blow up a Demon, blow up any of that stuff. It's going to be like a 10-point swing. You're usually pretty happy with it. Last up is this version of Techno-Organic Virus that I've been playing a little bit of, and I think it's a pretty solid list. I really just wanted to play some Black Bolt games, and I felt like Black Bolt might be actually a pretty interesting thing to weave some disruption into the shell. I feel like it's probably like the third or fourth best TOV deck. If it has a failing, it's largely that as a Mobius deck, you kind of get Mobius pretty hard when they're able to Black Bolt you, or when they're able to Mobius you before you Black Bolt, because then your stature doesn't work, and it's kind of like your whole thing. It's like the biggest reason you want to play this deck. But the reason reason I'm putting it on here is because there's a specific thing that I was really impressed with in this deck that I think maybe more people should be trying to build around. That is Silver Samurai Marrow, and really just Marrow generally, if you're able to like meaningfully discard her, feels like a really powerful card here. Again, for a lot of the reasons that we talked about with afflicting stuff, but also because like if you're playing a tempo mirror where both of you are just trying to stack points, doing points and points and points and points and points, which a lot of techno-organic virus mirrors are about, one of the best things you can possibly do if you're playing that tempo mirror is get 7 points for free that don't take up board space. And that's what Marrow is. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy to get there. Like, it might not be a thing that you can reasonably put into your deck. And this might be a bit of like, chasing down a lead that, while it would give us an edge in the mirror, just makes us less consistent in ways that make the deck worse overall. I would totally believe that. But I am really compelled by the direction this is going. Specifically, just discarding Marrow in your tempo deck felt really, really strong to me. It won me multiple techno-organic virus mirrors. Just having 7 free points was a really big deal. And I think that that is really something to maybe pay attention to if this metagame starts to stick the way that it is. Because it's not just 7 free points. It's 7 points that aren't gambitable, right? Like, you can't ungambit. You can't gambit away the Marrow because it's never actually on the board, right? Like that. It's 7 points that don't take up a board space in an archetype that is very heavy on board space, right? Like this is, I'm not saying there's something here per se, but I was really impressed with just Marrow in tempo shells. It's a big reason why I also like that Super Giant Modok Proxima deck. The metagame is just a little bit smaller than it was previously, and so things that are just doing a bunch of points for free, where it's like, oh, I played Moon Girl and my final turn is discarding 2 Dakin shards, 2 Proxima Midnights, and 2 Marrows. And it's like, that's just good. That's just a good thing to do. And it wouldn't have been a month ago. A month ago, that loses to Sholau. A month ago, that loses to Star-Lord. Now, we're in a metagame where that's just like a good thing to do. And I think that's a good thing for the game as a whole. So, 2 things before I let you go. First of all, I know this video is a bit late. It's because I recorded the entire thing and then realized that my recording had no audio on it. So I had to go back and re-record it. This is my second time through. The second is, thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.